Hey guys, Mike Lukic here, and welcome back to the Solver School YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be exploring one of the newer solver applications on the market, Deepsolver. The folks at Deepsolver actually reached out to me a few weeks back and asked if I'd be interested in using Deepsolver to create some content. So I spent a few days really diving into the tool and using it a ton, and I gotta say, I'm really impressed at the overall features and functionality of the tool, and in general, just its usability for both new and experienced users of solvers alike. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to be exploring Deepsolver in a little bit more detail with you and highlighting some of those features in a little bit more depth. Before we actually jump into the tool itself, at the end of this video, if you are interested in moving forward and subscribing to Deepsolver, you can do so by clicking on my affiliate link in the description below, or by going to their website at www.deepsolver.com and entering my promo code SolverSchool20. And that'll get you 20% off your first month if you choose the monthly billing option, your first quarter if you choose the quarterly billing option, or your first year if you choose the annual billing option. It'll also get you twice the amount of calculations that you would normally get for the tier that you ultimately choose to go forward with. Without any further ado though, let's just jump over into the tool and I can share all that I've learned about Deepsolver with you. So when you first log into the Deepsolver application, this is going to be the main hub screen that you actually see. And before I actually dive into the various features and functionality of the tool, I'd like to take a minute to just tell you what Deepsolver actually is. Deepsolver is a fully functional solver that's accessible via web application. And in my opinion, that's the most attractive feature for Deepsolver and the reason why it's worth giving it a try. Now, why is this actually important to you? If you've used solvers in the past before, maybe you've used something like POSolver or GTO Plus or Simple PostFlop, they're great applications, but they're applications that actually need to be downloaded and installed on your computer. That means you actually have to have a minimum level of hardware requirements in order to be able to run those applications. You need a certain amount of RAM to make sure that you're able to store the number of calculations within a game tree, and you need a powerful enough CPU to be able to process through all of those calculations. Deepsolver doesn't have those limitations. Because it's all accessible via web application, all you need is a modern internet browser and an internet connection, and all of the calculations take place via the cloud. So you can access Deepsolver via a tablet, via your Mac, via an old machine, and you're going to be able to churn through pretty complicated calculations without having to worry about the hardware you're actually running them on. Now, that's a really, really big selling point. I can't tell you how many emails I get from people asking how they can simplify game trees so that they can run solvers on their old laptop or a really old computer. And with Deepsolver, you're not going to run into any of those issues. So let's take a look at the actual portal screen and we can see some of the things that you can actually do within Deepsolver. Well, first and foremost, there's the GTO trainer. Now, GTO trainers started becoming more of a thing and an expected feature in a lot of solvers over the course of the last few years. It's no different here in Deepsolver. You have the ability to actually play against the solution and practice in real time, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit. The custom solution screen lets you create any custom configuration. Now, a lot of the web-based solvers that I've seen are not necessarily letting you solve any single situation. They are pulling from a library of pre-solved solutions. Deepsolver definitely does have pre-solved solutions, but you also have the ability to create a custom solution and solve it via the cloud. So again, this is a fully functional solver letting you solve any scenario. Finally, there's this option here for an aggregated flop report, and this was music to my ears when I actually heard about this feature in the first place. If you've followed some of the work that I've done on my website or within the Solver School channel, you know that I love mass data analysis and I love using the aggregated report functionality within both POSolver and GTO Plus. Within Deepsolver, you have that functionality here. So you can actually study that same spot over multiple boards to see how the board affects the strategy of the output. And then finally, there's an option here. If you play a lot of online poker, you're familiar with a lot of hand histories via text. It's not an option right now, but on their roadmap here is the ability to be able to import that hand history and create a tree straight from that hand history. Over on the right-hand side of the screen here is this nice little function here to let you load up some recent games that you may have been working on. So maybe you're exploring different situations, you put your solver down, and you want to pick it up back again the next day, next week, whatever the case may be. You can actually see the most recent games that you actually set up via Deepsolver right here and actually access those really quickly. There's some features here at the top of the screen here too, so you can actually start a new game using this plus button. You can chat with the folks at Deepsolver to get some support. There's this notification section which pops up any new blog posts that may be on the Deepsolver website. And then there's this help section where you can actually watch some of the tutorial videos. They're going to be a little bit more in depth than probably what I'm covering today. They're probably also not going to have as much commentary as I will today, as I'm going to be looking at this more from a end user review perspective, and they're going to be teaching you how to actually use the tool. So they probably complement each other fairly well. There is the ability to enter their Discord, which is a good place where other people have the Deepsolver application. You can chat with the folks who created the tool, and it's a good way to just kind of be in a community of other people who are really trying to do the same thing that you're doing. And then you could actually visit their blog by clicking on this link here as well. And then finally, up here on the top right-hand side of the screen is this little Deepsolver logo, as well as this number, and it says get more. This is the number of calculations that you have left in your current plan. So as you can see here, I have 24 calculations left within my current plan. If you are using one of their higher tier plans, you might have a lot of calculations in there, or unlimited calculations, but this is the way Deepsolver actually tracks the number of calculations that you're actually running, and it clearly shows to you how many that you actually have left, and you can make the decisions as to whether you actually want to run a solve or not based on that particular number. So now that we've taken a look at this overview screen, I'm going to skip over this GTO trainer first, and I'm going to actually build a custom solution. So we're going to build a custom game tree and take a look at the output first before we actually start diving into the GTO trainer and showing you that functionality within the game tree that we actually built. So let's jump over to opening this and building out a custom solution. So now we're on this custom solution screen, and as you can see right here, the interface is pretty clean, and solvers can be fairly complicated. There's a lot of inputs that you have to enter, and right here it's pretty minimalistic. We have to enter these input parameters of the scenario that we want to analyze, and we have to enter a bunch of different things, and Deepsolver makes it pretty easy to work your way down this list to enter things like the board, your pot and stack sizes, the ranges, and then the actual game tree itself. The first things I can do here is I can actually change the name of the game tree. I can keep this as game 17 if I want, or I can actually change this game tree. I actually want to look at a 40 big blind MTT spot. So I'm going to go 40 big blind MTT, and then we'll do a big blind 3-bet versus cutoff open. All right, so we have our name of our tree here. Now let's actually go build this game tree out to actually take a look at the output. So the flop, I actually want to do this for a fairly dynamic board. So what you can do here is when you're actually selecting this initial street, you can pick your flop, your turn, your river. I'm going to look at this from the flop. And you could also click on this random cards and it will give you random cards. Now, Jack 3-5 double two-tone here is not really a dynamic board. I can keep doing this until I get to one, or I could just build out a board myself. I'm going to choose to do that. And I will use a 9 of spades, a 8 of hearts, and then we'll call it a 6 of spades here. So we have a somewhat dynamic board here, a 9-8-6 two-tone board that we're going to take a look at. So the next thing we have to do is enter our pot and stack sizes here. So in our situation, we have our out of position player is the 3-better, the in position player is the opener. So our in position player opens to 2 big blinds, and we're going to say the out of position player 3 bets to 8 big blinds. So we end up with a situation where there's 16 big blinds in the pot after the in-position player calls the 3 bets. There's also the big blind ante, which makes it 17 big blinds, and then the small blind folds, which makes it 17.5 big blinds. Now, if you're familiar with Deepsolver, you'll understand that you can't enter decimal points into the calculation here for the pot size. And it's the same thing with Deepsolver. If I tried to enter 17.5, I would try to do this point here, and I can't even enter a decimal spot right here. So to fix that, I just multiply everything by 10, and I just make the pot size 175, knowing that at the end, I'm going to have to divide everything by 10 to get it back into big blinds. That would make our stacks, we have to use the stacks at the start of the flop. That would make our stacks 32 big blinds if we started with 40 big blinds total. So we're going to make our stacks 320. If I was playing a cash game here, I could enter a rake and a cap, but since I'm playing a tournament, we are not going to necessarily worry about that. Now to set ranges. So I'm working my way down. I want to set the ranges for the out of position big blind 3-better or the in position defender here, the cutoff. I could enter the ranges manually here. And there's a few different ways in which I can actually do this. I can paste ranges in from previous situations. So maybe I have like aces through kings, and you can see as I'm typing them in, it's showing you what would actually be filled in. So I could apply that if I wanted to. I could interface with this directly by clicking any one of these options, just like I would with any other solvers. I could maybe choose specific combos. So maybe I only want to choose the spade varieties of a few hands. I could choose to do that in here. Or I could actually weight things. So I could maybe want to choose certain hands to weight at 50%, which is great if you are doing something like blending or kind of like rough smoothing around edges of ranges. Now, I'm not going to ultimately use this range. I just want to show you the different capabilities that you can actually do when you're filling out this range. And when you're happy with everything, you would just click this apply button. You also, if you want to build out your range library over time, you can save these ranges and you could end up with a robust selection of ranges over time that you want to use here. But I'm going to cancel out of this, and I want to actually go through what I think is one of my other favorite features with Deepsolver is this preflop range library. I can't tell you how many emails that I get from people asking, well, what ranges should I use? And the answer is always it depends. The ranges are going to be one of the most critical factors of the output of a solve. If you have ranges that are really off from reality, the output solution that you're going to get is not going to really represent that reality, and you may be trying to implement strategies that don't necessarily align with what's actually happening in the games that you're playing. So you want to try to get as accurate as you can with ranges. And that can be difficult sometimes because, I have a hard enough time, and I know a lot of other pros have a hard enough time understanding and fully knowing their own ranges. How are you going to possibly really accurately estimate your opponent's range? So a lot of the times the advice that I end up giving is start with equilibrium ranges. So there's a lot of preflop equilibrium solutions that are out there. And if you start with those ranges as a baseline and maybe take some things that you might know about a particular player profile to either add more hands or remove hands from that particular range to try to get closer to a range that might reasonably model what that player is doing. Well, the second problem, though, is not everyone has access to those preflop equilibrium range solutions. This is where Deepsolver has a huge library of all of those solutions. So we can actually pick our active players. You can actually look at, they have MTT ranges, they have cash ranges, I believe they go up to 100 big blinds. They have spin and go ranges, which I'm not really a spin and go player, but I do actually get emails from people asking about how do they use solvers to solve spin and go situations. So we do have spin and go ranges here as well. I'm going to choose this MTT spot, and I'm going to pick my players, which is our cutoff and our big blinds. Well, now we can actually define this preflop action. So as you can see, there are some ranges on the right-hand side of the screen. And if I change the stack depth to 40 big blinds, which aligns with our preflop stack depth, our preflop action is that it's a 3-bet pot, and our preflop open sizing was 2x, and then our 3-bet is up to 8x, we can now see the ranges of both of our players. Our big blind here has a 3-bet range, which is fairly polarized. Our big blind's equilibrium 3-bet range has some top end hands, the aces through 10s in range, and some 3-bet bluffs, which contain some of these weaker king and queen and jack X suited, and some of the offsuit ace hands in range and offsuit king hands in range. So we have a pre-flop range to start with from the big blind, and then the cutoff is going to retain some traps in range, and retaining aces and kings, as well as having some hands which probably presumably jam, so hands like ace king and maybe ace queen offsuit, but does retain a lot of hands in the cutoff defend range. And we have our two sets of ranges that we can actually start with here. We could, if we want to, edit these ranges and add some hands. So, maybe I want to say that our cutoff, we didn't think our cutoff was actually going to fold all of their pocket pairs. So instead, I'm going to actually just adjust this to say that our cutoff is going to have all of these low pocket pairs. Maybe we think that our cutoff would open all of their pocket pairs, and then they're going to defend all of their pocket pairs to the 3-bet. You can change this however you want. And maybe we also want to say that we don't think our cutoff would be doing this with king 5 suited and king 6 suited and king 7 suited. So maybe we'll just take those hands out of range. This may or may not be realistic. I'm not necessarily worried about that right now. I'm just trying to demonstrate that you can start with a set of ranges and adjust them from here. So once you get to a range that you're happy with for both players, you're going to get to a spot and you're going to hit apply ranges. And now we have our ranges set. So we have our board, we have the pot and stack sizes, we have our ranges. The last thing we need to do is build our decision tree for this current street. What we couldn't do here is we can actually click on this button and build a custom game tree. And this is great. You can actually build out a tree however you like. You can add up to 5 bet sizes, up to 3 raise sizes, and up to 2 bet sizes for 3 and 4 bets. So you can customize this for both the cutoff and the big blind. This is an interface that you're probably fairly familiar with if you have used solvers in the past, because it's a similar configuration to a lot of the other solvers that are out there on the market. And it's also going to show you how many nodes are in this overall tree to give you a sense of the size of the game tree that you're actually creating. So it's great. You can actually build the most custom tree that you actually want to make. The problem that you run into here is that they have this note, which is the number of the chosen sizings is directly linked to the size of your decision tree. So the bigger the tree, the longer the calculations actually might take. So there's this other functionality here, which is in beta mode, and there's this smart tree. And you can hover over this info button. And a quick side note, I do love the way in the interface here that they've saved a lot of space by including these hover over tooltip info buttons. As you hover over them, this tooltip pops up with a lot more information on what that function is and how do you actually use it. But this smart tree is a pretty cool feature which it's connected to Deepsolver's algorithm, which will take into account things like the stack to pot ratio and the board structure, and it's going to create a decision tree with the smallest number of bet sizings that will generate as close to the highest possible payout or expectation value for both players. Now, if you are trying to work within the confines of your own strategy, I wouldn't recommend going with this. I'd say go build your own custom tree because you already know what your sizings are that you want to implement in your game. But if you are just trying to build a game tree really fast, or if you're open to exploring different sizings in a strategy, this could be a really good option for you. And we'll take a look at that as we actually build this out. So I'm going to click this smart tree and it's going to calculate the tree size. And actually what you can see here is from the default custom tree, this smart tree actually has more nodes. So it has 33 nodes as opposed to the 27 nodes. So now that I've built out my game tree and I have my game preview ready to go, I'll go up to this top right-hand side of the screen and I'm going to click calculate. And that's going to take me to the next portion where I can actually look at the outputs. So let's hit the calculate button and we're going to keep this running to show you really how quick it actually is. The solver is running. You can see the wheels are churning in real time. What you can start seeing as you see the solver putting together an output is the interface is going to look somewhat similar to a lot of solvers that you may have used in the past. there is this window of the grid where you can actually dive into the hand level. You can hover over an individual hand to see the combinations, or you can start on the right-hand side of the screen, and actually I'll move my head up so we can actually see the whole output right here. You can start on this right-hand side of the screen to actually look at that more macro level and take a look at the strategies that you might utilize at the more holistic level, and how the frequencies are broken up. So let's start taking a look at this right-hand side of the screen. We can see here that in this simplified game tree, the solver gave the big blind, who is first to act here, two different bet size options, a 40% bet size and a 20% bet size, which somewhat makes sense here in the sense that the stack to pot ratio is fairly small. It's a little bit less than 2 in this spot, so we wouldn't expect a fairly large bet to come in here on the flop. So we have two different bet size options. We also have the check option here. There's this cool function here where a lot of times you might look at this and say, especially when there's a lot of the combinations are split between the small bet and the a little bit larger bet, 20% and 40%, there's not a huge gap between those two. It's very, very different than looking at it if it's 20% and 80% pot. So what you might want to do here is you can actually click this button to combine these two together and just say that you're betting 90% of hands and you're checking 10% of the combinations. You can also look at the overall just stats for this particular game tree. So the big blind does have a little bit of an equity edge, 54% to 46%. The big blind also correspondingly has a little bit of an expectation value edge, earning 91.65, and remember we have to move the decimal points back, so it's 9.165 big blinds for the big blind to 8.335 for the cutoff. And we can take a look at how those two ranges compare to one another. One thing I like here is that you do have the ability to look at this at the hand class level. So I can click down to hand strength, and we can see that our board is 986. We can work our way down and see for the big blind how many straights that we actually have. We can see the sets, 2 pairs, over pairs, and I can zero into any one of these by clicking on this option to see, well, straights, we only have 2.7 combinations of 10-7 suited that would have been put into that 3-bet range. For sets, we have 2.6 combinations of 9s, 8s, and 6s that would have been put into this 3-bet range. So, and so on and so forth. And you can see the Manhattan graphs here to hover over and how the solver likes to allocate each of these hand combinations into the different strategies, and showing you the number of combinations in the overall range and the equity, and so on and so forth. So there's a good way of actually looking at this at that hand class level. And then finally, you can get down to the individual hand and combination level, as I mentioned, and take a look at the strategies and how it breaks down for each of the hands that are in this range. We, just like other solvers too, we can look at the strategy, we can look at the expectation value, green being where the majority of our EV comes from, and the more red areas are where we're not necessarily making a lot of EV. The range is simply going to be a visual here to show us what is in this overall range, so we can see the composition of this range. And then the equity here is similar to the EV. It's going to correlate very strongly with EV, green being the hands that have the most equity, the orange and red being the hands that have the least equity. As we go over, we can see this from this info button. This next section, it lets us change the result display mode. So whether I want to look at these squares normalized as full squares, as absolutes, or whether I want to actually show the EV and equity values. So if I actually want to click EV, it'll show the EV. If I want to click the equity, it'll show the equity. So I can actually quickly see the numbers here rather than trying to hover over things. I'm going to go back to normalize in the strategy. And then finally, if I wanted to delineate by individual suits, I can do so here as well. If I want to, I can also export this detail, so I can export the results from this screen, whether I can export the strategy as a CSV, or I can export the ranges as well. And if I can either save that file to my computer, or I can copy it to my clipboard if I would like to. Finally, if I want to click on this calculation details, I can see how many iterations this solve actually took, how long it actually took, and just some more details about this overall calculation. So there's a lot of different things you can do here to explore this game tree. If I want to now navigate my way through the game tree and say, well, maybe we want to explore the big blind betting 20% and then seeing how the cutoff should respond to that at equilibrium. The cutoff here having this call or raise 50% option. You can see that the cutoff is virtually calling almost all the hands in range, because a 20% bet size, you're going to have to defend a lot of hands in range, even the ones that might be a little bit uncomfortable to defend. But the cutoff has position and is going to be calling a lot in this situation, and virtually has no raising range. I'm going to actually go back to the root here and go through this next feature, which I think is pretty cool. So a lot of times when you're actually working through game trees, you'll see scenarios, and this is especially the case when you actually put a lot of different bet sizes in. You're going to see scenarios where you might have options that the solver doesn't necessarily use as much. And you can choose to simplify the game tree if you like. So in this case here, I might change this. So maybe I want to change this and say, I want to remove anything, and I'll make this a little bit lower because I think 10% is a lot. So I think 5% actually might be pretty good. I want to remove any options that where the solver chooses to allocate less than 5% of combinations into that overall frequency. And then what I can do here is simplify the game tree, and I'll click this button to do that right now, and it's going to recalculate this game tree, removing the options that where the solver chose to actually allocate less than 5% of combinations into that particular node. And it's going to take a couple minutes or a couple seconds to recalculate, but you can see here we recalculated. Some of the numbers changed slightly because we changed the game tree and we resolved the game tree. So what the solver actually did here was it removed options from the game tree. And if I click on the calculation details, it dropped the game tree down from 33 nodes to 27 nodes. So it removed several nodes from the game tree where the solver chose to allocate less than 5% of the range in the game tree. And we can click our way through to see how that looks in the rest of the game tree. And we can see throughout the game tree where the solver may have removed some particular nodes. And this just simplifies the game tree a little bit to really only show the nodes where a significant number of combinations are actually being put into that individual strategy. So, pretty decent and cool feature. So now that we've actually taken a look at the output a little bit, the next thing we might want to do when we are working through this scenario is node lock. And you can actually node lock fairly well using Deepsolver, and they have this button here, Find Exploit. So now we're going to click this Find Exploits section here, and it's going to take us into our node locking functionality. And the node locking functionality is awesome. This is something that I love the most. When you're node locking, as I mentioned earlier, it's really hard to try to guess what your opponents are doing. So when you're node locking, it's trying to pick what they might do with every single combination in range is a challenging undertaking, and it's something that you can actually easily go overboard on. In Deepsolver, what they actually have done is they've taken something that I've tried to do somewhat intuitively, and they've codified it into their application, which is awesome. And it's essentially node locking by profile. So you can see these profiles up at the top of the screen, and I'll hover over the info button so you can see the tooltip. But when you apply a profile to something, what it's going to do is it's going to give that player a specific tendency. So you can read the tendencies here. A GTO profile is going to give a tendency of a perfectly balanced solver strategy. A nit is going to be give the player a profile of someone who actually folds a little bit too much versus bets. A bully is someone who actually will be betting too much, and then a station would be someone who actually calls too much versus bets. So what the solver is actually going to do here in this spot is when you actually apply a specific profile, it's going to adjust the hands in range and kind of shift it a little bit from equilibrium to err a little bit closer to that particular profile. So if I picked the bully in this scenario here, when looking at the big blind, the solver is going to adjust some of these checks in range and move them over into the betting category. You can also manually node lock here. So you can, if you want to specifically node lock individual hands, you can do so if you want. So maybe you know that, this type of player is always going to be checking with their strongest hands. Maybe because they're trappy or whatever the case may be, you can go in there and allocate like the 10-7s and then the sets into a checking range. You can build custom solutions in here. So maybe you want to hedge a little bit and choose to split between different bet sizes or different a check and a bet in spots. You can choose your own custom split if you want, or you can actually build out certain tendencies, whether you think your opponent is aggressive, passive, GTO, and so on. So this is a good way to kind of adjust ranges at a holistic level based on a player profile, as opposed to trying to allocate individual combinations into individual portions of the range. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to use this bully function, and I'm going to click bully, and I'm going to see you watch this game tree right here and see. We can see that at an equilibrium level, the big blind is checking 9.4% of the time and then betting about 90% of the time. When I click bully, it's going to, I can pick whether I want to apply this at a small, medium, or large level. I'm going to choose large. We're going to say the big blind is a really big bully and bets a lot. And when I apply this profile, it's going to change this to now the big blind is checking only 4.5% of the time. And it allocated some of those checks into a betting range. So now it's betting more frequently. Well, now that I've actually changed the game tree a little bit, I have to recalculate to be able to see the output. So I'm going to click this calculate button again. And as it calculates, it's going to recalculate with that constraint in place. So it's going to recalculate with the constraint of the big blind betting more frequently than he or she should at an equilibrium environment. And when I take a look at the output, so the output should be up in a second or so, you're going to see some of these numbers next to some of the frequencies. So you can see that it's 2.8 up, 2.1 up here, and then 4.9 down for check. That's the change as it relates to the GTO solution. Same thing, you can see this from an EV standpoint. By going away from equilibrium, and it's not surprising, by going away from equilibrium, the big blind is going to lose 0.1, or in our case, it's actually 0.01 big blind. So even by betting more frequently, you could actually probably make the assumption that the big blind could just bet all of range and not really lose a lot of expectation value, given that we've reduced this checking frequency by basically 50% and haven't really lost much EV at all. If I want to compare them specifically to the GTO solution, I can click this compare GTO button, and you can see that this is the exploit output for the big blind, and then here is the GTO output for the big blind. And I can actually navigate my way through the game tree this way too. So I can click on this bet 40% and see how the cutoff's response would be to that bet 40% sizing, and again, how that actually changes from the exploit to the GTO solution. Let's go back to the root again, and what we're going to do finally here is we're going to actually go over to the GTO trainer and actually practice this spot. So after we've taken a look at the outputs, we've node locked a little bit, now it's time to practice a little bit, and we want to actually practice against the solution. And Deepsolver has some pretty cool functionality to be able to practice against the solution in their GTO trainer. So let's take a look at the practice spot. So now we're going to practice the spot, and I'm going to move my head again so I'm in the way. And now as we're in this practice spot, I have to create the settings first before I actually dive into the practice mode. So we have our current street, and this is just going to be the game tree that we've actually set up. We can choose which position that we want to test, and we've been looking at the big blind from the big blind's perspective, so let's just continue to be the big blind. You can look at the game mode, whether you want to practice the whole hand, flop to river, or you can drill one street. Let's just drill this one street. And then finally, you can look at the trainer calculation type. This is more relevant for the whole hand. So if it's going through the whole hand. It's going to be recalculating things. So you may want to choose whether you want it to run fast or accurate, or you want it to be just extremely accurate and run a lot of iterations. It's not as relevant for you if you're just drilling one street, because this solution is actually already solved. But once I'm happy with this setup, I can click start, and it's going to give me the option to choose a challenge where I can drill multiple tables at the same time. This is pretty cool. This is I dove into this a little bit, and it really is like you're playing multiple tables. It's fast paced. You can choose 2, 3, or 4 tables. They actually have this nice functionality here that it's coming soon, where you can actually give yourself a timer, so you have to act very quickly. It's a really cool way to test this, but I'm actually just going to go through the educational one, which is better for these one-off scenarios where you might have a little bit of extra hints, and it's probably really good for a more dedicated study session. So when I get to the selection that I'm happy with, I'm going to pick start hand, and now I am actually in the solution. So I'm the big blind, and we 3-bet, and we are given a hand that is in our overall range. And we can see the ranges here. Our big blind, we do have a little bit of King 8 offsuit in our overall range. Not a ton, but there is a little bit of King 8 offsuit in our overall range. We can take a look at the overall strategy. So it gives us a little bit of hint information here. It can give us a sense of the equity buckets, which is a cool feature here. It can give us a sense of the overall hand strength. So this is a top 30% given the fact that we have middle pair. So all of these things in mind, we know that where we have a top 30% hand, we're basically almost betting all of range anyways. This is something that is likely that we're going to be putting into a betting range, and I'm going to be guessing that we're going to probably put this into a small betting range. So I'm going to pick this bet 20%. And by the green star here, that's the correct play here as it relates to our actual testing. And if we look over here on the left-hand side, it can give us the option of taking a look at our decision. So our stats, was it perfect? Was it good? Was it a mistake? Was it a blunder? And we can see all of the individual details here. This training here, this is the God mode, which is optimal strategy and expectation value, are displayed all the time. The training is the optimal strategy and EV, which are displayed after each decision. And then the game, which is no hints are actually available. So you can actually show, do I want to see everything? Do I want to see just a little bit, or do I want to see nothing here in this spot? Which is a nice little feature here too. So this is actually giving us hints, which is, we don't necessarily want to get hints all the time. So it might be good to click this game button. So we're actually playing this spot in a little bit more detail. Let's play one more hand, and we can take a look at this from a game perspective. Now we have queens here in this spot, and again, my guess is that we're either going to be betting 20% or 40% here. We're not going to be really checking with queens in this spot. I'm just going to put 40% to see what it does. So we bet larger with the queens, and we can see that our decision was perfect again. And we can take a look at the individual games that we played here. Our GTO score was 100% with the queens. We can look at the moves, and with this particular scenario with the queens, we can see that this action, the queens checking netted us 145.72, whereas betting large netted us 145.7. So basically the same EV from checking and betting large in this spot, whereas betting smaller, which was not chosen in the strategy at all, netted us a lower expectation value. So again, betting is a perfectly viable option as compared to checking in this particular spot, and we get a perfect decision for that. So again, really cool feature. I also like this, the dice up here if we want to randomize things. So if I want to click a new hand, then we can actually just randomize this, and it will randomly draw us a number. So this is helpful if we're trying to do some mixed strategies here and, figure out, do we want to roll high? Do we want to roll low? If we, might want to split things into some bets and checks as well too. And you can change the settings if you want anytime throughout this process as well. So now that we've actually gone through this hand in pretty good detail, I'm going to go back to the home screen. I'm going to just get out of this scenario. And the last thing that I want to take a look at is this aggregated flop report. So let's dive into there. So let's take a look at the aggregated reports. And so what I can see when I open this up is this looks fairly similar to when I actually build out an individual game tree, because it basically is. I'm building out a game tree that I want to solve for a number of boards as opposed to just one board. So instead of actually adding one board in here, I can add a group of boards. Now I can pick these custom sets of boards that are already created. So this is a small set of 32 boards, a medium set of 60 boards, or a large set of 114 boards. And if I want to click through here, I can take a look at those individual boards. There's 1,755 possible boards that are strategically different in the game of Hold'em. In these subsets, the folks at Deepsolver have brought some smaller subsets available to try to model the entire game tree, but knowing full well that it takes a lot of time to solve 1,755 boards, you can create these subsets and have somewhat of an accurate representation of the overall game. And if you want, you can add boards from here. You can change this. You can remove individual boards. So maybe I want to remove specific boards in here. I want to add in particular boards. You can do all of that and get to a point where you're happy with something and click confirm and go from there. You can also create custom boards. So you can start from scratch and build any boards out that you want. Or you can actually choose this specific section where if you want to study individual boards, maybe you only want to study low boards or paired boards or ace high boards, you can do so using any of these options. I'm going to actually pick this paired boards option. And we can see all of these are paired boards. I want to select the pot and stacks, and we're just going to pick the same thing that we did for the previous game tree. And so we remember we had a 17.5 big blind pot with stack sizes of 320. Our pre-flop library, we used the cutoff versus big blinds. We had 40 big blind pre-flop stack depth, and we used a 3-bet pot. I know I did change some of these ranges somewhat, but I'm not going to necessarily adjust that right now. And once I'm happy with this, I can click Apply Ranges, and I can choose whether I want to use a small, medium, or large game tree. I'm just going to pick the small game tree. I'm going to make this somewhat simple. This is 27 nodes, and then click Calculate. And as you can see here, I'm solving 19 boards, so this is going to take 19 calculations. I have 21 left, so I have enough to actually solve the solution. So I'm going to click Calculate here, and through the magic of editing, we're actually going to fast forward to when we actually have an output. While the Deepsolver software is going to run fairly quickly, we're solving 19 boards, so it's going to take a little bit of time to solve those 19 boards. And when I actually solve those boards, whether it's 19, whether it's 30, whether it's 50 of them, it's going to take a little bit of time, and this might be a good time for you to grab a cup of coffee, take your dog for a walk, and then come back 20 minutes later, and hopefully those boards are done, and you can actually dive in and start taking a look at the output. So we'll be back in a second when these are finished solving, and we'll take a look at what the output looks like. All right, now we are back, and you can see here that all 19 boards have been solved. So it's a pretty good format here. You can actually see all of the individual boards here on the left-hand side of the screen. Quick view of the strategy, how it splits between checks and bets, and then you can actually see the detailed breakdown of how the frequencies are split between the check, the bet 50%, and the bet 70% frequencies. This tree is a little bit different than what we had used in our single game tree that we actually built, because we used that the smart tree building functionality in the initial game build, whereas this one we just used the small game tree build. So it's going to be a little bit different, but that's okay. Again, you can choose to configure this however you like. We also see the breakdowns between the EV, the equity, and the equity realization for both the out of position and in position player. So good ways to actually dig into this at a really high level and see the discrepancies. You can sort this by any one of these columns, so that's typically how I like to view these scenarios, is sorting things by one of these strategic frequencies. So looking at the boards where we're more likely to check versus the boards where we're more likely to bet here at the bottom. And you can kind of try to decipher what are the key differences of these boards that we might be checking more frequently versus the boards that we might be betting more frequently in this particular formation. If we want, we can actually export this. So by exporting out, we can actually pull up the CSV, and I will pull over. It's just a CSV that pops up, which is our aggregation analysis, and all of these key stats are in a nice tabular format so that we can actually analyze if we wanted to on our own. We can, if I want to look at all of the boards containing one particular card, I can do that here as well. So maybe I want to look at just a board that contains a 5. Well, I can just click the 5 here, and then that'll just show me all of the boards that contain a 5. If I want to choose the boards that have spades and get rid of only boards that have spades, I can click that, and now all of these boards are shown only the ones that have spades, and so on and so forth. Is a good way to kind of filter through this report if you like. Finally, if you want to actually dig into any individual board, you can just click on this button here, which is this little graduation cap looking button. And maybe I want to dig into this ace queen board and study that a little bit more. I can click onto that, and now it takes me to the individual game tree for the ace queen board. So that does it for this video. Thanks to this folks at Deepsolver for letting me test drive their application. If you are interested in checking out Deepsolver for yourself, you can go to the website clicking my affiliate link below, or you can go to the website and sign up using the code SolverSchool20. And that's going to get you 20% off your first month if you sign up for monthly, your first quarter if you sign up for quarterly, or your first year if you sign up for the annual subscription. It'll also get you 2 times the amount of calculations that you would get with whatever pricing plan that you sign up for. I definitely think it's worth your time checking out Deepsolver. It's a really, really powerful and good solver application that, again, you can access from anywhere. So you can go to the website, check them out. You can try their 7-day free trial and decide for yourself whether you want to move forward with the product. But I definitely think it's worth testing out. So thanks again, and see you in the next video.